September 1930. Afternoon on the Riviera. In Cannes, outside the Carlton Hotel, a small crowd of people have gathered on Lake Placid. They're standing around a brand-new racing green Bentley blower, exceptionally pretty and extraordinarily fast. Bentley had made only 50 or so of the cars, and this one was especially rare. It was a road model built to racing specifications. The hood was a little longer, the tank a little larger, the dash a little sleeker than was standard. It was 14 feet long and weighed almost 1.5 tons. A good chunk of that came from the silver supercharger mounted at the front, which gave the car its unusual name. The car was so big that the boy in the driver's seat seemed a little lost inside it. The steering wheel was too broad for his chest and too thick for his fingers to wrap around. He was 19, and he looked it. His mouth was spread out in a broad grin, which puckered up little dimples in his smooth cheeks. He wore his sandy hair swept back beneath a cap, peak turned up so that the wind wouldn't pluck it off his head. He tugged on the magneto switches, sent a pulse of current into the engine, slipped his hand across the dash to flick the Bakelite switch that controlled the fuel pump, and then pressed the starter button. The crowd stepped back as the engine exploded into life, and the long, square panels of the hood rattled underneath the restraining straps. Dust rushed up off the road and coated their clothes. They had to shout to be heard above the roar. "Good luck, Billy!" He watched the dial. He had to wait 10 seconds while the oil pressure rose. Oh, and one more thing. He reached across to the little clock on the far side of the dash. There was a stopwatch set into it, 3 little dials inside a small, square window. He'd paid an extra shilling to have it installed. He twisted the cog that flipped the counters back to 0. Immediately the cylinders began to roll back around again, counting upward. He took a last glance at the St. Christopher's medal strapped to the dash. Then he put his foot down and slipped the car into gear. He had 40 miles to travel on a winding road and 60 minutes to do it. Make that a second under 60 minutes, since he didn't just want to beat the record, he wanted to be the first man to break the hour barrier. The French authorities had recently scrapped their speed limit, which had been set at just over 12 miles per hour in built-up areas. Billy passed that before he was even a little way down Lake Placid, with the sunlight flickering off the silver fittings as the car accelerated out toward the coast road. The new regulations insisted only that vehicles must be driven at moderate speed. This, Billy felt, was a subjective sort of stipulation, one that entirely depended on what you understood moderate to mean. His conception of moderation was a little different from that of the men who had written the rule. But then, they had said, too, that the driver must remain in total control of the speed at all times. And he always was, even as he shot out of Cannes onto the road to Antibes, where he pushed the car so hard that the needle on the rev counter shot up past the red line and the supercharger kicked in. At around 80 miles per hour, it started firing compressed air into the engine with a high-pitched whine that cut right across the low growl of the engine, which was why they called it a blower. The car kicked on again, as though it had been booted up the trunk, up above 100 miles per hour and faster still to 110 miles per hour, 115 miles per hour, where the needle held and started to flicker up and down. As he came into Antibes, Billy reined the car in again. It had a crash gearbox, a bugger to work. Billy pressed the clutch, came out of gear into neutral, revved the engine till it was in sync with the cogs, and slipped back into a lower gear. A double D-clutch. He did it unthinkingly. His foot danced on the pedals, and his practiced hand worked the stick down by his right side, moving, as his friend Henry Longhurst put it, as smooth as butter. Of course, Longhurst said, if you got it wrong, you could break your wrist, let alone your gearbox. But Billy was in rhythm with the car. He worked it as a good drummer does his instrument. Hands, feet, and thoughts, all moving together in time.